Good evening and welcome to the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. I am Anna Mascorella and it is my pleasure to bring you this season's first installment of RMCAD's public lecture series, part of the Visiting Artist, Scholar, and Designer program, which I coordinate. The VASD Program is an interdisciplinary initiative that fosters vision, creativity, and innovation by bringing leading national and international artists, scholars, and designers to campus. Providing direct access to contemporary art, design, and culture through an inspiring comparative framework, the program creates a cross-disciplinary environment made possible through appreciation and critical inquiry. It is with great pleasure that I may introduce to you our distinguished guest, Golan Levin. Golan Levin is an artist and engineer interested in exploring new modes of reactive expression. Through performances, digital artifacts, and virtual environments, Golan applies creative twists to digital technologies that highlight our relationship with machines and make visible our ways of interacting with each other. Golan has exhibited and performed widely in Europe, America, and Asia. As an educator, Golan's pedagogy is concerned with reclaiming computation as a medium of personal expression. He teaches studio art courses in computer science on themes like interactive art, information visualization, and audiovisual performance. At Carnegie Mellon University, Golan is currently an associate professor of electronic art, where he also holds courtesy appointments in computer science and in design. In January, he was appointed director of the Studio for Creative Inquiry, a meta-laboratory within Carnegie Mellon, dedicated to supporting atypical, interdisciplinary, and interinstitutional research projects at the intersection of art, science, and technology. Golan has spent half his life as an artist embedded within technological research environments in places like MIT's Media Laboratory, where he received his undergraduate and graduate degrees, and the Ars Electronica Future Lab, and the former Interval Research Corporation in Palo Alto. This evening, Golan will be presenting his lecture entitled Interactive Art and Speculative Human-Computer Interaction, where he will explore the medium of response within new media. Thank you all very much for coming tonight, and please join me in welcoming artist and engineer Golan Levin.
Thanks very much. Hi, can you all hear me? Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me here at RMCAD, and hello, Denver. It's really nice to be here. Let's see. Title of my talk, Interactive Art and Speculative Human-Computer Interaction. Not really sure what to call what I do. I don't really care too much for categories. For me, the main thing, is it interesting or isn't it? And the work that I do tends to span a lot of different kinds of modes of practice and kinds of research. I'm an artist, I guess, or a designer, I guess, or a researcher, I guess. Mostly, I'm interested in exploring new ways that we can communicate with each other, and I'm interested in exploring certain themes in visualization of information and communication, and exploring new possibilities for technology, which I regard as one of the most important media that an artist can use today to, which is shaping the world, and which artists should have a voice in the conversation as far as how it's shaping the world. So I say speculative human-computer interaction because one way that I do what I do is that I invent new forms of communication or new types of human-computer interactions, and I put them out into the public, kind of like one puts artworks out into the public, whether it's through installation and performance, or online artworks on the World Wide Web, or even sometimes print works. But that these works sort of suggest new ways of interacting, and a few different things happen with the work that I do. Either it becomes part of the daily vocabulary of the world because it's part of a big dialogue about how we should interact with computers, and a few years later, it's such a part of the desktop life and our daily environment, whatever it might be, that it no longer is seen as an artwork, or it brings people to tears and moves them in ways that I couldn't predict, or it gets completely forgotten about. And those are sort of the ways that my work ends up being treated. But for me, it's all just a mode of research. I'm really interested in sort of finding and discovering and identifying new forms of art. And to do that, I'm an artist, you could say, who uses the computer as his medium, and specifically computation. And what that means is I write code and sometimes make circuits to do what I do. So I make code, and that's my medium. And the work I'm going to show you today has two concerns. Primarily, the first is sort of information visualization. I'm really interested in being able to see communication, whether it's seeing the infome, which is the sphere of information we live in, the sort of this like buzzing, biosphere of information that surrounds us, or whether it's sort of getting to understand ourselves better through seeing our own communications as individuals. And that brings up the second interest of mine, which is sort of an understanding of abstract communication or nonverbal communication, which forms another current of my work. I'm really interested in how people can communicate to each other without words, and can we reflect this back to ourselves in such a way that we find out that users or visitors or participants can find out something new about themselves. So that's the work I do, and I thought I'd show you some of this tonight, and then talk maybe a bit about how I do what I do. After showing you some of my own work, I'm going to come back to the new laboratory I direct, which Anna mentioned, called the Studio for Creative Inquiry. For the last year or so, I've been directing this laboratory that is allowing other people to make new kinds of work as well. And so I'd first like to begin with a discussion about information visualization, which is really in the air these days. Maybe you guys know about a blog like Infosthetics, or you've heard of visualizing complexity, or these other kinds of blogs, and lots of books now that are really thinking about information visualization as an important mode of communication that happens out there in the world today. If you follow the New York Times at all and you see some of the beautiful data visualizations that they're making, or if you just sort of notice the general trend in visual culture towards graphs, people seem to be much less afraid of graphs than they used to, and that graphs are, and data visualization in general is becoming a really important way that people can communicate with each other. For me, I think that information visualization sort of can be placed on a triangle of inquiry. We can think about three corners: beautiful, interesting, and useful. And I'm personally not so interested in the useful. I think that's where all the money's at, obviously. And anyone here from Wall Street On Demand? No, those folks are in Boulder. They're neighbors, and they're doing the useful stuff for all the stock traders and so forth. Beautiful and interesting are really the axes where I like to play. And for me, interesting in particular is the one that inspires this little picture. To imagine information visualization as a sort of a self-exam for society. Is it possible to ask new questions of the world, collect data, which are the responses to those questions, and present it back to us visually in such a way that we can learn something new about ourselves that we may have never understood before, and to present such questioning and visual presentation as a mode of art practice. And to give you an example of this, I'll talk about a project I did actually almost 10 years ago, which began something like this. I went to a search engine, and I was really bored, and I was just sort of typing random stuff into the search engine. And I typed in like a number, like 910 or something. And when you type in anything into a search engine, you often get this little number up here, which tells you the number of results, 84 million results if you type in the number 910 on the particular day that I typed this in. Now, 84 million results, are you actually expected to look at all 84 million hits? No. In fact, actually, Google will cut you off after 1,000. They figure, refine your search. There's no way that they're going to actually serve up 84 million different links. This number is here just to kind of give you an indication about the success of your search, maybe the popularity of your search term, if you will. Tells you, Michael Jackson has, X million hits, and I have fewer, right? So, so what we see here is that 910, let's say, has a certain popularity. This number, 84 million. And that's an indication of its relevance to us. So what happens if we type in another number like 912? Well, so we get 69 million hits, a little bit less popular. Type in something which is right smack in between the 911, and we get 109 million hits. So there's something going on here. There's some way in which the number 911, right, is somehow more important, right? And we can imagine a few different ways. It's a Porsche automobile. It's the emergency code. It's also September 11th. And so there's a way in which, if we were to inspect the popularity of every number from 1 to a million, as I did in this project called The Secret Lives of Numbers, you would basically get a kind of a portrait of our society as reflected by the popularity of all the numbers we use. And so I'd like to quickly jump over to that. Let's skip over to project. And forgive me, I'm going to have to turn my head like this so I can show you the project because I can't see it on the screen. So this here is an interactive program which I first made, started collecting the data in 1997, as you can see, and have been collecting periodically since then. And it's the popularity of every number from 1 to 1,000,000. And what we see, and what's kind of interesting as we can zoom in here, is we can see regular patterns, that this data actually reflects something about ourselves. It reflects our history, it reflects our interests, it reflects, as we'll see in just a moment, all kinds of interesting aspects of our culture and our nature. So first, our biology. We've got 10 fingers, and it just means that when we use our fingers for counting and numbering, we have a base 10 numbering system. Right? It would be quite different if we had 12 fingers instead of 10. And because we have a base 10 numbering system, we like to round. Right? It's easier to talk about, like, I've got about 600 stamps in my stamp collection than if I actually tell you I've got 613. You might be even more concerned for me. So what we see here on these big spikes are the fact that, 400 and 500, every single, multiple of 100 here has a big spike. Same for the thousands, the 10,000s, and so forth. And if we zoom in and just sort of look at the in-between numbers, we see, well, there's a big spike on the 50s. And if we zoom in even further, we see 440, 430, maybe something special going on here at 415. But that the numbers themselves, are spiked at multiples and powers of 10. Moving on, we see the low numbers are really popular. These are the numbers we use every day, right? We talk about, hey, I'm inviting, 6 friends over for dinner, right? Or I got 13 students in my class. These are the numbers that form the bread and butter of daily life. And they're small numbers. They're the numbers we care about the most. But some other numbers start showing up in here as well. There's a big spike, starts around 1750, right? And these are the years. And what we can assert from this, for example, is a very interesting thing. We could say that, for example, that 1960 is literally half as important as 1980. Right? That somehow the relevance of 1960 to us is just simply not as great. The slope of this curve is our rate of forgetting. It is literally how much we cease to care about the past. All right? It is the window with which we care about the present, and the further things go back in time, the less we care about them. So this is a very interesting curve. This data, as I mentioned, is from 97, so you'll see it kind of bottoms out before the year 2000, and for more recent data sets, that changes. So just to finish up, and I'll show you this other sort of data on the right-hand side. What's this weird plot? Well, what's going on here is I've arranged the data in rows of hundreds. So it goes 0 to 99, 100 to 199, 200 to 299, and we start to see some patterns that are kind of interesting. So here, again, these are the multiples of 10, these bright stripes, right? You can really see. There's a big multiple of 50 right there. This is just a piece of bad data. Don't worry about that. So in this grid right now, we're looking at the first 10,000 numbers. How many of you, can you all see this diagonal line? Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Those are 4-digit numbers that rhyme. Those are numbers, I'll put the cursor over that. Those are numbers, let's try one here. Let's see. That's a number like 4444. Okay, or I'll pick another one, maybe not quite the same. Let's try another one like 4747. Okay, why on earth would numbers like this be more popular? Well, maybe if you're a pizza place or a taxi company, you'd really like to have those kinds of phone numbers in your phone number, right? Easier to remember. Other things we see in here, we see the tax forms of our daily life, 1040. We see zip codes that matter more, and television shows like 90210, right? We find out that certain area codes, in terms of telephone codes, indicate cities that are somehow more populous than others. Okay, we can literally talk about zip codes that are more important, like the Beverly Hills or New York City or whatever kinds of zip codes occur a lot in business communications. We find processors like 386, 486, 586. Okay, and all the numbers that sort of take place in computing world. And finally, I'm just going to show one last little example of this. If I just kind of scroll down a bit, let's scroll down just a smidge. Button, come here. One of these is my favorite. There we go. That's number 12345. More popular simply because it's easier to remember. And give me a 5-digit number. There you go. Okay, so this is sort of what I mean when I say that we have here kind of a self-exam for society. We see refracted in this our biology, our history, the years that matter more, 1776, 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And we see our history reflected in this, all these different kinds of things that represent an answer to just a very simple question. What's the popularity of every number? We learn something new about ourselves and how we reckon about the world. Okay, let me close this here and just kind of just move on. So in addition to visualizing how a million or billions of communications happen, in addition to seeing communications of millions of people and literally billions of pieces of data summarized like that, I'm also really interested in seeing the communications of single individuals. And so in 2003, I started to work with these two characters. They're abstract singers. They're vocalists who make their living by making strange sounds with their mouths. And they both have incredible vocal repertoires. They're basically experimental vocalists. Joan LaBarbera has been working for a long time in the experimental new music field with people like Steve Reich and Philip Glass. And Jaap Blank is a Dutch sound poet who's been very inspired by 20th century abstract poetry like Kurt Schwitters and so on, and is really an expert in making all kinds of unusual sounds with his mouth and thinking he's a guy who can literally make 15 different variations of the letter R, you know. So the two of them together, I invited, along with Zach Lieberman, a frequent collaborator of mine, to develop a concert in 2003, which was a performance that would allow us to sort of see speech. The fiction was that, you know, what would it be like if speech cast visible shadows? And the premise of this concert was to imagine seeing the speech, the songs, the shouts, the barks of these two experimental vocalists in a context in which their speech was visualized. So the way this is working here, Jaap is moving around. As you'll see, he's making a sound kind of like this. He's going, and every flap of his cheeks is creating one of these balls that's coming out. Here's a close-up. Okay, and this is just one scene in the concert, which has about 15 different scenes and lasts about half an hour. Here's another view of that, and I kind of explain what's going on here. There's three basic components. There's a computer vision system, which is tracking the performers and trying to identify where their heads are. Okay, that's the first part here. There's a voice analysis, system, which is listening to their wireless mics and trying to pick apart all the different things their voices are doing, whether it's analyzing their bass frequency, the fundamental frequency of their voice, or thinking about how bright or how dull the sound is, or in some cases trying to analyze what letter they're saying, roughly. And then finally, there's a graphic system, which is projecting graphics, which are tightly coupled to both where their heads are and also what they're saying or how they're saying it, so as to make graphics appear to be emerging from the point of origin, namely their heads. And in the concert, we have about 15 different metaphors or visual ideas. For example, this is Joan. In this case, she's wearing a voice-sensitive costume. It's a sort of a shadow that's pegged to her body, but also responds to her voice. This is a voice-generated environment with these blue columns that she creates. This is a voice-produced fluid where these two vocalists are singing, and these sort of fluid comes out of their mouths. They can paint with their voices by making pitches in various ways. And so I thought I'd show a bit of this here. I'm going to turn this up. Sorry, what's funny? I'm going to pause it for a second. Actually, something I haven't mentioned here is that every little sound he's making, each little flap of his cheek, and so on, is being recorded into the computer. And in just a moment, these balls are going to fall. And what may not be clear from the chaos that ensues is that when they hit the bottom of the screen, they release the sounds that he recorded inside them. This is So here a metaphor kind of resembling water, and every little click they make produces a kind of an impulse, like dropping a pebble in the water. So the premise here is something like a television nature show. He's got abstract subtitles as he explains the behaviors of this unusual creature.
Sie viser keine Möglichkeit, man skal bare læse magasin til, at han må have ordene mere nok
He's speaking in a made-up language.
Elsker der var den trinsen der er nok med fisen frysøj, eller ikke det skylden over, vi ved på panden.
Direct the fluid by pointing their arms in one direction or another. So again, it's a body-based interaction at the same time as a voice-based interaction. So in this one, they can paint with their voices by making rising or falling tones. If they make a rising tone like boo, then it makes a clockwise sort of curve. And if they make a falling tone like boo, then it makes a counterclockwise curve. If they just make a solid tone, it draws a straight line. And so they're able to do a whole bunch of different drawings in this way. So after making this, I should say, I do a lot of work which goes across both performance and installation. And for me, these are really interesting and different modes that have a lot of potential in both ways. In the case of a performance, you can have experts like these guys who can really demonstrate to an audience a new form of interaction. And the audience can appreciate it vicariously and maybe get to see some things that they wouldn't be able to do themselves or wouldn't discover as quickly as they might. But with an installation, it becomes possible to actually give this back to the public. And what we discovered was that after developing the concert, which had about 15 different scenes, about 5 or 6 of these scenes could be used by anyone. And I'm just going to cut this and jump to you get to see some of the pictures they're making there. It really could be used by anyone. So here's the same installation, for example, being used by a couple 5-year-olds. This is a pair of 6-year-old girls. So one thing I'm really interested in is in expanding the vocabulary of human action. Okay, potential of interactive art is to really allow people to discover themselves in new ways and to allow them to discover their own potential as creative actors. And to do that, you have to give them new ways of acting in the world, to understand new ways of them, to give them new ways of understanding themselves. And so for many years now, I've been looking at basically alternatives to the mouse, right? The mouse being the main interface that we use with the computer day to day, but that the mouse represents just about the narrowest straw you could try and suck all of human expression through. And to try and think beyond that by using our full bodies, which are these amazing things that we can use in so many different ways to explore the world and get to know ourselves. So in this project, for example, called Interstitial Fragment Processor, it's an exploration of the negative spaces that form in and around our bodies. Here we go. Quick video. It's a very simple idea. When a little negative space is formed within your shadow, it becomes suddenly into a concrete, if you will, virtual object that falls. When it's released, it makes a sound. It's a very simple graphical premise, but it's an interactive premise that's only possible to experience, in a live context. It's not something that can be described in some sense. It can only be experienced.
I feel bad.
Strangers start to relate to each other in new ways. And touch each other, actually, which is quite unusual as well. Or at least touch each other's shadows. So for a long time, I've been interested in using the body as a basis for audiovisual exploration. I think it would be a mistake to say that I'm thinking about the way that sounds and images are correlated. I think that I don't believe in any absolutes, synesthetic absolutes about how images and sounds ought to or could be related. But rather about how both of these together, about sound and image, can be related to what the body is doing. And that this forms the basis for instrumental expression as we have with instruments, but also for visual expression like we have with pencils and paint. By combining these together into instrumental expression that we can, through a single gesture, produce both sound and image together, my basic idea is that these are really high bandwidth paths to the brain and give an opportunity for joyful and creative play. Here's another example of this. This is a project called Scrapple, which uses these little scraps on a table, the premise of which is that the table is the score. It's a table about 9 feet long, and you can put small objects on it. Any dark objects that are put onto the surface of the table are interpreted as objects in a musical score. The long dimension is time, where these grid markings mark off 16th note beats. And the vertical dimension, from her perspective, these represent octaves. So there's a sort of 8 octaves going from bass to treble away from her, and a few seconds of sound going across the screen. So you can put actually anything onto the table, whether it's your keys or whatnot. But we provided some dark objects like made of rubber and felt because they're nice and tactile and easy to sort of shape in the right ways. And here's a little girl playing with it. It has some interesting potentials. Now, notice that you can actually position things off the grid, which means the potential to explore things in between the notes and in between the beats, and also just make a hell of a racket. So here's a brief demonstration of how it works. There's a projection overhead. These are just rubber corks. And this projection overhead is showing this kind of simple augmented reality, which shows you this additional layer of information. It's possible to project other grids on it as well. We give different kinds of tempos and pitch scales. Vertical marks like this span a whole range of pitches to create kind of a percussive burst. And from that, one can develop something that sounds much more musical. This is a kind of a performance I've done with the project. But one can imagine it as a kind of a VJing effect, where you're literally playing this to produce beats. Both in installation and in performance versions. And again, expanding the vocabulary of human action and allowing people to discover themselves in new ways and new forms of play at the same time. So I've shown some work that uses the body and uses the hands. Most recently, I've been working with the face. The face is a really interesting place that people can work. It's got a lot of expressive potential. So the most recent thing here is project like this one. So what's going on here, it's a project called Reface, and it's basically back to the small scale, thinking about how we can create interactions with our faces that make us more aware of our facial expressions and that can be built on the computer's increasing potential to understand our faces alongside with us. As you know, face detection and face analysis have become sort of a burgeoning field of computer research and has been something that has started to become available as a tool for artists. So in this project, it's based on the Victorian game, the parlor game of the exquisite corpse, which some of you may know, where in the parlor game, the pencil game, you draw, one person draws the head, another person draws the body, and another person draws the legs or something like that. In this game here, it records video of people's faces, and the faces are cut into three parts: the forehead, the eyes, and the chin, and then these are then reassembled. I'll show to produce these kinds of composite portraits. Here's a picture of that.
A portrait sequencer is a surreal video masher that composes endless combinations of the faces of its viewers. Based on the exquisite corpse parlor game.
Right. So her
the
face is
Reface
being recorded right
installation
now. I'll just turn
records
down
and
the
dynamically
voice of that
releases
guy in the
3D
background.
videos.
Basically what it does is it uses your own eye blinking as a form of editing. It records your face as the duration between two eye blinks. So when you blink, it starts to record. When you blink again, it stops recording. And that enters into this kind of assemblage you see here. Blinking also then triggers the next arrangement of faces. And in this way, it creates a sort of a generative group portrait of the people in the project's locale. So you kind of get a lot of face play, and you get people sort of both investigating, you know, how can they enter something kind of funny into the system, but they also get to see what they look like when they're hybridized with their friends. As you know, if a gang of people come up to the project together, then all their faces get blended together into these exotic hybrids. Most recently, this was installed above the door of a high school in Anchorage. So I don't know if you guys can see, over here in the lower left, this is the sort of capture station in the school library. You come, you get your face recorded in there, you hit the record button, and then you sort of get to enter your face into this display system that's shown over the main doors. And as I said, it's a very diverse high school in Anchorage. It's got, you know, students of every possible ethnicity, and it, in this way, sort of mixes them all together to show the diversity of the students in the school and gives them a kind of a playful outlet for seeing themselves in regular ways and in new ways. So the face is a really interesting locus for play. So are the eyes. And once we know where the face is, we can learn where the eyes are. And eye contact itself is an incredibly charged sphere of human communication, one that's only beginning to become something that computers can understand or help us understand. There's a concept or a technology called eye tracking. It's a sort of suite of different kinds of technologies that can make an estimation of, first of all, where your eyes are, and second of all, where you're looking. Most eye trackers in the world are either for people who are severely disabled, which is a really good use for them, or they look something like this, where there's sort of a helmet at one end and a missile at the other. And I'm really interested in eye tracking for everyday people who are, let's say, in art contexts or just in everyday contexts, and particularly in the idea of artworks that understand how we're looking at them and maybe can even respond to us, respond to how we're looking at them, perhaps with their own forms of gaze. So in this case, we have kind of a schematic representation of an artwork that consists of a pair of eyes and is basically aware of how we're looking at it. And this was the basic sketch for a project called Opto-Isolator, which was my first attempt to make a robot that could interact with us using the sort of familiar psychosocial primitives of eye contact. I tried to strip down the phenomenon of eye contact into its basic primitives. And to do this, I said, okay, I'm just going to have a single eye, and it's going to be able to move left, move right, and have a kind of a blink capacity that would respond to us using the sort of familiar ways we have of interacting with people through eye contact. It has a few different interactions. There it is, looking at her. This was the first version of it. If you're far away, it'll track your body, just kind of like look at you, like the famous paintings from Scooby-Doo. I should get a clip of that. If you're a little closer, it'll find your head and kind of track your head. If you're even closer, it'll find within your face, your eyes, and sort of study them. And if you're within a good distance, like about 1.5 feet away, then it will find your eyes and try and estimate where your eyes are looking and respond to that. If you look at it too long directly, it'll sort of look away as if it's shy. If you look someplace that it can look itself, it will try and look there with you. To see, well, what are you looking at? And it will basically sort of study your face and sort of give you the impression that it's got some kind of intelligence, if you will. And this is the guts of it, just to sort of show you what's going on in there. A computer, a couple cameras, and this hunk of plastic. Some of you may recognize this little item in here. I know I spoke to a bunch of people today in Russ's class who are using this very same microprocessor. This is an Arduino, which is a really popular microprocessor, which is to say small computer, that people are using to make all kinds of interesting physical objects nowadays. It's really taken over. It's made for artists by artists, and we'll talk more about that later, about how there's been a revolution in tools to allow artists to make stuff like this and to treat this as their artwork. Anyway, here's a quick video of the Opto-Isolator. I forgot to say, if you blink, it blinks exactly 1 second later, which starts to put into motion these things called your mirror neurons. Have you heard of mirror neurons? Really interesting, yeah. So mirror neurons are really interesting. Everyone's got them. There's some neurological hardware we all have called mirror neurons, which are a part of the brain that make you feel good when someone is doing what you're doing. So, for example, if I'm talking to you and you nod your head, I start to feel really good, and I start to nod my head too. And it's basically this: when you start to get your mirror neurons firing, you just feel like you're being understood, and this gives you this, this rush of endorphins. You just feel like, wow, I'm being understood. So, and you can get into a feedback with this. Try it the next time you're talking to a friend. You just go, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. And they'll start imitating what you're doing. This has been documented in lots of videos. Two people sort of talking together, if they're having a good relationship, they'll start to adopt the same postures with respect to each other. If one person leans forward, so will the other. If one person's nodding, so will the other. And so this device attempts to do that, the Opto-Isolator, by blinking when you blink and looking where you look. And it sort of almost works. This is the second version, which has a more silvered surface and has a bit of a faster reaction. This was the only video I got of it, though, before I had to go back to the shop. Someone stuck gum in its eye, so it's, yeah, there we go. But it looks like that. One interesting thing I learned, though, and this is sort of a frustrating thing about programming in general, or computer hardware. It does take time to process these things. It takes 1/30 of a second for the cameras on the robot to take input from it. It takes about another 1/10 of a second for that information to be processed, and another 1/10 of a second for a command to be sent to the eyeballs, and then another 1/10 of a second, or say, for all of that to be to move to the right place. Which means you can actually have quite a delay between the time that you want it to react and the time that it actually does. And in the course of doing this, I came across Ollie Johnston's rules for animating eyes. I don't know if how many of you in your animation classes have come across Ollie Johnston. He's one of the original Disney animators who worked on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and I'll be talking about him more in a little while, but he's one of the great animators of the 20th century. And he had 12 rules for animating eyes. Number 10 and 11 were particularly interesting. He basically would say, if you're going to have, he calls it an accent, that means this is some kind of event, something happening, something to look at. That if you're going to have an accent like this happening over here, and you're going to have your animated character look at that, they should basically move to look at that event about 3 frames of film before the event happens. And this helps cue the person watching the film as to what's about to happen. Likewise, if there's going to be an event like this and the character is going to blink, okay, that instead of having the blink happen after the event, you actually have to have the blink in his, this is his intuitive research here, and I trust him, that you have to have the blink happen actually like 3 or 4 frames ahead of that event. Which means, actually, that you need a time machine to do this properly with a robot, because a robot can't actually predict what's going to go on. And this really does work. I mean, if you actually watch people, they'll do the same thing. People will blink before something is about to hit their face. They don't blink when it hits their face, right? You have some kind of predictive capacity where you yourself, as an animated character, can know something's about to happen and look there before it happens, or know something's about to happen and blink to protect your eyes or what have you. So it became a problem with this robot, I think, something I learned, that basically I would have really needed a time machine to do it properly, and that's something I haven't found a solution to yet, but maybe soon. Speaking of time travel, I'm going to talk about now my next project. This is not me, however. This is something that inspired me greatly when I was a child. 1978, jumping back in time. This is a performance by a group named Mummenschanz. And it's, well, a bit of genius dance. They're sort of a dance troupe that uses these elaborate costumes, or very simple costumes actually, to communicate non-verbally. And I saw this when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, and it just profoundly affected me. And as you'll see, I developed another project years later, which was inspired by this, which developed another sort of eye contact. And that was this project here called The Snout. So this is Double Taker. It's a huge 8-foot-tall robot that lives on top of a building, and it was installed for a couple months during the summer on top of the Pittsburgh Center for the Arts. This robot is called Double Taker because it tries to project the idea that it's always surprised to see you. So it does a double take, right? If it sees you, it kind of turns to look at you, and then it goes, okay, I got the idea, and it looks away, and then it thinks to itself, oh, I missed something, oh, and it looks back, right? It does a double take. So the Snout, or the Double Taker, is basically in some ways by making itself appear to be continually surprised to see you, that there's something special in all of us that's worth a second look. And so here's a quick video of that. This is with a bunch of kids who are on their way to Sunday school. The first batch of kids is used to seeing it. They've seen it a bunch of times. They've been seeing it every day for the whole summer. So we just get to see Snout kind of checking them out. There it goes. Here comes the next batch. It gets a little bit confused. It's actually looking somewhere close to her shadow, just so you know. Up there is a 1-foot wide googly eye made from a clock face. I'll show another quick video of this one. This is just me just testing it out. So this is, as we'll see, this is really a problem of what I would call real-time character animation. And this idea of how can you make something seem not just like it's able to move, but that it actually can convey a kind of a character, a specific emotional state, or a specific kind of character quality to it. Inside this thing, here I go. It's inquisitive. It's somewhere between Big Brother and Sesame Street. Inside that thing is an enormous 800-pound robot arm. This is it's an industrial robot arm that I borrowed from a friend, and I got good friends. It's normally used to weld cars, but we don't do too much of that anymore. So it was available, and what we then did was dress it up. Here it is. You can see from the control room. The window that's just off to the side where the camera is located. And over here on the right-hand side, you can see the software, which is actually running the whole thing. And it's got what I'd call a computer vision system. It's looking at the scene, and there's some people here. And it tries to look at the 2 points that have the most motion, really, basically. And motion you can measure by looking at the difference in pixels from frame to frame, or the difference in pixels from the background in a kind of a pre-existing state when you knew there was nobody there. So different kinds of motion are added together, and here's a kind of a stick figure that represents what the computer thinks is the robot's doing. And then the signals that describe this kind of geometric arrangement are then transmitted to this 800-pound robot arm living on the roof. So again, as I mentioned, this is a problem of how to create the illusion of life. And most recently, I've just been going back and back and back to one of my well-worn books here, The Illusion of Life by Ollie Johnston, the guy I mentioned earlier who talked about how to animate eyes. And my current interest these days is exploring real-time character animation. Animation like what some of you may do in your animation classes when you specify, okay, there's a character, I've rigged him or her in this following way, and they're going to do this kind of thing. But what happens when the character is just defined not by a specific movement, go from here to here, but by a certain character that it has when it moves from any place to any place else? That's the problem that I would say is real-time character animation and is the current focus of my research these days. So these days, I'm also now the director of this thing called the Studio for Creative Inquiry. It's a special lab at my college, which is devoted to experimental enterprises across academic disciplines. And I call it a meta-laboratory, meaning we're not actually a laboratory ourselves, but we connect arts research to anything within the university that an artist might want to connect with, typically a kind of technical resource. So what I thought I'd do is I'd just show some of the most recent projects that are coming out of the lab I direct, not by me, although I'm contributing to some of them, to kind of give an idea about how I'm using the skills and knowledge that I have to help new people and other people make projects like this. So the mission of the studio is to support atypical, interdisciplinary, and interinstitutional research and educational initiatives at the intersection of art, science, technology, and culture. We support faculty research, we host interesting visitors, we produce interdisciplinary events, and we advocate for hybridity, which is, I think, a really key concept. We're trying to tear down walls because so much of the work that I do and that I believe needs to be done involves approaches that gather from multiple different disciplines simultaneously. Most recent project, this is called The New Artist by Axel Strachnoy, who's a visiting artist. And it's a pair of robots developed in collaboration with the Robotics Institute. So again, we're using our facility to connect a visiting artist, in this case, to roboticists who are game, who are up for doing something interesting. The idea of this project is to have two robots, one of which is a performer, that's this one here, and the other one is a observer. And basically, the performer is dancing, if you will, for the observer, and the observer is expressing its degree of interest and judging the performer. And the performer is sort of taking cues from the observer to see how it should modify its behavior to better ingratiate itself to the observer. It's basically one robot making art for another. And so it's a very interesting project. Does it work? Yeah, it does. Here's a quick video. The performer is doing its best to kind of get the attention of the observer, and the observer is sort of judging it and sort of indicating, what does it think. And they do actually enter into a kind of a feedback loop that's very unpredictable with respect to each other. Here's the observer. Its inclination or its attitude sort of tells the performer how interested it is, as do the twitching of its antennae. trying.
Cinematically, that's the easiest way to do it.
I think what we really see here, it's a good reminder that robots don't have to look like us. They can have, their own unique kind of real-time character animation and their own unique bodies, really. We can give them bodies that are novel. Another project that's coming out of our studio right now is called High Point Park. Here's a picture of my beautiful city, Pittsburgh. It's a triangle surrounded by 2 rivers on top and bottom that merge on the left. And at the very sort of tip of this triangle, right over here, you can see this building. That's the tallest building in Pittsburgh, right here, called the U.S. Steel Tower, former U.S. Steel Tower, actually. And we don't have steel in Pittsburgh too much anymore. But here it is. Nowadays, instead of steel, it says UPMC. That's our medical center. And it's the tallest building in Pittsburgh. It's actually the highest point between New York and Chicago. And it's about 800 feet tall. Has a 1-acre footprint. And it's the largest, highest flat space in the world, which is a sort of unique designation. Basically, when they built this thing in 1970, it was made of Core 10 steel. It's a very interesting steel that doesn't rust in the usual way. And because of this particular steel they used to build it, there was no requirement for it to taper. So unlike most skyscrapers, the footprint at the top of the building is exactly the same as the footprint at the bottom. So it's got about 1 acre up there of space, which looks like this. And one of our researchers, David Baer, is working on a project to basically consider what it would be like if it were much more interesting up there, but rather a green park where people could have a sort of sustainable green roof that would provide its own energy and provide a kind of a nice lookout place for Pittsburgh to see itself. Right now, there's just an unbelievable view. I was up there last month to take some photos, and the view is like nothing else, and it's just a kind of a wasted opportunity right now. So we're really keen on figuring out how to do this, and David is putting together a feasibility study for what it would be like, both economically and logistically and architecturally, to put a park of this kind up there. You can see it sort of mirroring the shape of the city itself. Last project I'll show here is a combination of the Studio for Creative Inquiry and the CMU Robotics Institute. They're competing for something called the Google X Prize. It's a $25 million prize for a non-governmental organization or agency to get a robot to the moon and do a few tricks up there. So $25 million goes to the first school or private company that can get a robot onto the moon, and CMU Robotics Institute is putting in its hat into the ring. And one of the things that they've said is the Robotics Institute said, well, in the 60s, we already got to the moon, in '69, and we've done it several times since. What could distinguish a moon mission today, other than merely that it's a hard thing to do and a school could do it? And they decided that what would make it interesting today is if it connected to culture, and recognizing that art had not been something that yet had projected itself out to the moon. They invited the studio to assemble something called the Moon Arts Group, basically to figure out a palette of different art projects that would take place on the moon. So one of them is there's about a dozen different projects of all different kinds. One of them is a project to which I'm contributing called Moon Marks, and the idea is that we would use the tracks of the rover to draw pictures on the moon, and that these pictures, when seen from a certain angle, might resolve into something that we can sort of recognize as a basic symbol. Tracks on the moon are not worn away by wind or weather. There's none of that on the moon. So these marks will persist for a very long time. And one of our projects is to have a sort of a flash application online by which children can submit drawings to be rendered onto the moon by the rover. So that's look for that in 2013. So anyway, that's sort of what our lab's up to. As you can see, it crosses urban planning and robotics, and also animation and some space art, and also in projects I haven't talked about, biology arts as well. So that's what I'm doing these days, and with that I'd like to sort of say thank you, and we'll take a bunch of questions.
Some questions and some sound.
Sir?
Do you find that the process is
Does writing code annoy me, or does it or is it enjoyable? Sort of both. I mean, it's very much how the work has to be made. I do look forward to a future, and I certainly have friends who are working on a future in which writing code is easier than it is now. And I should say that there have been immense strides in tools that allow everyday people, artists, designers, young people, and the rest of us to make code that allows us to do things. Sometimes it's very frustrating, and sometimes it's become second nature. It's like any language. I think that for students who are starting out to learn code, I would recommend being patient with yourself, because it is literally like learning Japanese, assuming you don't speak Japanese already. It's like learning another language like Japanese, and to assume and expect that you'd be able to have, be conversational in Japanese after just a couple weeks is totally unrealistic. Being able to, say thank you and please is usually pretty easy within the first day, and hopefully we'll do some of that in the workshop tomorrow. Yeah, sometimes it's really annoying, and sometimes it's just the only way it can be done, and sometimes it allows for certain kinds of discovery that are unique to the medium. It's a great medium, and also a very annoying one. I think that probably any artist would say, though, that their medium has both great pleasure for them and great trials. I mean, my mom's an abstract expressionist painter, and a pretty good one, and she's been working in painting for 50 years or something like this, and or more. And at the same time that it's also sometimes very natural for her, and she's in the zone. She's also times when she's just struggling, and it's not turning out the way she'd like. That's the nature of I think an artistic medium, is that you're always fighting it and negotiating something with it, achieving mastery, but also encountering problems. If you'd solved all the problems, it wouldn't be very interesting. Miss?
Neither.
With dirt and all that? Yeah, so the question is, the question is about this. Are we on crack? I'll tell you what. David is not from Carnegie Mellon. He's an external visiting fellow at the Studio for Creative Inquiry. And when he first submitted this proposal for a green roof on a park, if you will, on top of a skyscraper, I literally thought he was crazy. I was like, what are you talking about? And he began to make a very coherent argument. Look, it's just wasted space, and there's no other observatory up there. Doesn't have public access right now. And every other great city has great observatories. If you look at Seattle or Boston or New York or Chicago, there's just amazing, amazing vantage points. And that these vantage points form an important component of the architectural fabric of the city. People need to be able to see their own city, and it's not just tourists, it's people from the city who need to be able to get an understanding of the place that they live, and that this is just something missing from the fabric of Pittsburgh right now. There's no vantage point, and this building is ideally positioned to do it. Do we actually, would we actually have dirt? Yes, we would. Carnegie Mellon right now really excels, has a great department in urban planning and sustainable architecture, and when David made his proposal, I presented it to a bunch of people from around the university, and they were like, actually, that's a pretty interesting idea. And when I saw that the architects and urban planners didn't think it was crazy, that was when I began to get turned around. I really got turned around. I'm committed to the idea now. I really got convinced about a month ago when I was up there. We were shooting some multi-gigapixel panoramas, which I can show you online. They're unbelievable, of the views from up there. And when you're up there, you realize it's a really convincing idea. Is this the final design? By no means. Actually, this is one of 36 different designs submitted by teams from our School of Architecture, undergrads who've worked in 4- and 5-person teams to present various kinds of speculative concepts for what it could be like to have a kind of a public zone up there. Would we have to build a new ceiling? It's a pretty strong building. This Core 10 steel is pretty amazing stuff. And the weight of that doesn't even compare to like the weight of a floor here. But to really tell you the truth, I don't know the exact technical details of the weight of such a volume of dirt, and so I hesitate to tell you for sure. I'm sure that there are people working on the problem, and the biggest problem of this is of the feasibility of this idea is actually not one which is about, how would you get the dirt up there? It can be done. The biggest problem actually is that the building belongs to people who are in New York City, and they don't seem to be particularly interested in doing something interesting with it. So the biggest problem is just convincing them that there's a viable business that makes this something that is financially sustainable and not just ecologically sustainable. Yeah. So we're also working with the School of Business at Carnegie Mellon to model that. Yes, Miss. I haven't, but close collaborators of mine have. Some of the software that you saw in the Messa de Voce project was used by my partner, Zach Lieberman, for a project with deeply disabled, severely both psychologically and physically impaired children, where they may only be able to move, they're wheelchair bound, may only be able to move very small, like movements, fingers and their heads and so forth. And that to see this kind of adopted by, or sorry, to see this captured by and interpreted by a camera to produce large effects on screens can actually be very gratifying to these kids. So yeah, I personally haven't worked myself with autistic or disabled children though. But I think there's definitely a lot to be said for the potential for nonverbal communication as captured and interpreted and augmented by software for such scenarios. Yeah. To a certain extent, I'm making now software for the mobile phone, like the iPhone and the iPad, and that these are environments or experiences that can be shared that are nonverbal, that are sort of gestural and sonic in some cases, that can be enjoyed by anyone, and hopefully lots of people. So, yeah, sir.
Kind of going back to your metaphor of learning Japanese.
Yeah.
In software, traditionally the idea of literacy is this: you're able to read and consume the written language, and then also write the written language.
Mm-hmm.
So, comparing that to software, do you think? I mean, it's fairly easy for us to say I'm computer literate. Like I know how to operate software. Do you think it's equally as important to be able to write software as well?
Yeah, you're just making my argument for me. Yes, I do. What he said. Yeah, it's a really good analogy. That computer literacy consists really, the true computer literacy consists of being able to make software for yourself to your own ends, whether it is because you are committed to working with and supporting quadriplegic or disabled children in ways that people aren't writing software for them, or whether it's because you have some kind of bizarre idea about visualizing speech that Adobe's not going to make for you, and just to investigate one's own whim or to make the world a better place. These are things that artists are very good at and have a real intuition for, and which can only be done when they take software in on themselves and when they're able to make new software. There's a brand new book out by Douglas Rushkoff, which I just got and I recommend highly, called Program or Be Programmed. And it really makes a point in a very concrete way about the need to support programming as a basic primitive of contemporary literacy. We think that using Facebook is using the computer. Really, they're using you, right? I mean, and although you think I get connected to my friends, remember they're really making a lot of money off of the social network that you're contributing to. There's a great Marxist interpretation by Trebor Scholz of Facebook, which basically says that all of that human labor, 500 million people spending hours and hours and hours to build this tool for them. How lucky are they, that they're able to monetize the effort that you guys create in making your Facebook pages. So to kind of take that back and to make the computer your own again is something that I'm really committed to, and I totally thank you for saying it for me. Yeah. Other questions and comments? Oh, right there. Sorry. Yes, so you're talking about the Moon Arts project. So this is the most lightweight of the different proposals because it merely involves moving the rover. Getting the rover there is going to be a real amazing thing if the university can do it, if the folks in the Robotics Institute can do it. There are about a dozen different ideas in the Moon Arts project. So one of the main limitations here is weight. It costs $700,000 per pound to bring something to the moon. And there you go. And so there are people who are paying to bring certain things to the moon, primarily scientific research of various kinds, and they've gotten the bulk of the bulk, if you will. And so a lot of the art that we're doing is very small or very weightless. We do have one thing which is a sort of nanomolecular capsule that contains DNA from every living organism, if you like that. For example, which is, I guess, kind of sculptural. There's, it's very small. It's a little thing. It's little. It's very lightweight. It's a little thing, but it does contain some keys to life. There's some great ideas that our team has about plaques that indicate interesting things about human culture on Earth, sort of maps to where the interesting points are on the planet. And some other things to do with signaling and performance of this thing, sort of dance-like things and various kinds of resonances that can be established between the moon and the Earth with signals that get bounced back and forth, musical signals in particular. And then there's actually some interactive experiences involving kids piloting the thing around in real time with a joystick. So some of it's sort of more educational, some of it more artistic. There's about a dozen different ideas. You can actually read about it at moonarts.org, which is, I think, the name of the site. So yeah, but the weight is the big limit there. Sir.
When we were looking at numbers graph,
Yep.
you showed us the 2000s. I was really interested in the exponential slope. And I was wondering if you could probably comment on the exponential interest in the future and what that might mean.
Yeah, there is a bit of look ahead, right? There's sort of an interest in the next few years. The web's a very exponential place. I mean, if you ever see, you might hear of this so-called curve called the J curve or the hockey stick, where things are really popular and then kind of trail off, to a much lesser extent. Like on the World Wide Web, either you've got millions and millions and millions of viewers, or you've got none, and there's very little in between. It's sort of similar with human attention, I think. The network tends to make things. The network tends to reinforce the things that are already interesting and to suppress the things that aren't. So when memes get passed around, when ideas get passed around on the web, if it's interesting, it gets really, really interesting, and then suddenly it's got 1 million views, or you guys see on YouTube, right? You're like, wow, this person's cat has like 50 million views, and you're like, what is that? And it's just because of the incredible nonlinearity of the World Wide Web. To understand this really well, I would recommend the book Here Comes Everybody by Clay Shirky. It really explains the concept particularly well. And how it affects the numbers themselves, I think it's just every sort of piece of data we could want to talk about. If it matters to us, it's going to matter much more, and if it matters less, it's going to matter much less. It's just the web draws out these kinds of contrasts. Yeah. Sir.
You started out as an artist with crazy ideas, and you thought, well, in order to accomplish what I want to do, I better become an engineer. Or did you start out as an engineer and become an artist?
Well, first of all, let me say that, I have friends who do what I do, and we each have our own unique stories, which are sort of somewhere in between those two different poles. I have equally known friends of mine who have started out in the sciences and said, the heck with this, and they end up making useless things instead because that's where their passion is. They really want to explore certain kinds of ideas that don't have immediate financial applicability to or immediate military applicability, which is where a lot of the dollars come from to make interesting things. I myself started out as an artist. I worked out initially in painting and drawing and in music composition, but I was always interested in technology. And it seemed to me, and this isn't to disrespect anyone who's working in traditional media, but it seemed to me always that an artist was sort of obliged to use the medium of his or her day. And that was always my opinion for myself, that to understand how this could be used as a new territory that was full of open potential, but also as a way of understanding its consequences, understanding its impact on our lives, that artists had to be a part of that conversation. And I guess a quick story was that I was working as a graphic designer when I got out of college in a research laboratory. I was designing icons. I was designing thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of icons. In the course of 5 years working on this, I had made about 6,000 icons, roughly 60 icons a day. And that was my job for a long time. It was my first job out of school. And I was in this research lab, and there were engineers and computer scientists around me who were making amazing things. And I started to have ideas myself about amazing things that I wanted to see. And I realized that software would have to be made to implement these ideas that I had. And I would first go to some of these engineers and I'd say, hey, would you make this idea for me? And usually the answer was something like, no. I'm busy. Okay? And this was in the bubble in San Francisco during the height of the internet bubble, 96, 95, when engineers were $150 an hour and there was a lot of work for them, and why would they drop what they're doing to help me make my wacky little idea? Sometimes I'd find someone who was like, yeah, it's kind of interesting idea, I'll help you out. And then sort of halfway through, they'd be like, you know what, actually, I know I'm only halfway done on this thing, but actually I just got a job, earning $150 an hour, so see ya. And I'd have this half-finished thing that I had no idea how to fix. One time, there was somebody who actually was an engineer who liked my ideas, and he said, oh, I'll help you make that. It's a cool idea. And he was making the code for me, and I was like kind of watching over his shoulder and not really understanding what I was seeing. It was like slash, semicolon, plus, plus. I was like, yuck, what is that? It's like, it looked like Japanese. And he's like, okay, it's finished. And I was like, okay, yeah, make it go, make it go, make it go. And he presses go, and it just looks really ugly. It's like, looks terrible. It looks horrible. And I'm like, and he's like, I made it for you, man. And I was like, oh, it's okay, but could you make it look a little bit more like supple? And he's like, I don't know what you mean by supple. And it's like, it's like, and you realize then that you sort of like that there's a really important way in which you have to be close to the material to be really a master of the craft. And finally, the final straw was I was friends with a guy who's a very good artist, actually, very good media artist at Interval and research where I was at the time, and he had more experience in programming than me. He had a lot of experience actually, and he's like, oh, you poor little guy, I'll help you out. And it just felt like I was being pitied, and that was just way too much for me. I mean, this crossing a line, and I was like, damn it, it can't be that hard. And at the time, I mean, the tools nowadays are so much better for artists who want to do this kind of thing. I mean, there's just huge, vibrant, busy online communities of people all helping each other out to do this nowadays. But 15 years ago, there were still books, and so I went out and I got the book, and I just kind of read about it. Nowadays, it's so much easier. There's very, very vibrant communities, people who are starting out to very experienced people at all possible levels, and big chat spaces, and every possible answer you could want is Googleable. So it's a great time to start out in this way. I'm envious of anyone who's starting out now. It's very much easier. Yeah.
It just seems to me as though there's a lot of potential in the sort of intersection between technology and creativity to improve upon, this method of human-computer interaction that we've been using for.
Yeah. Oh, sure. And I just happen to be more interested in the sort of the speculative ways. I look at Carnegie Mellon. We have a really fantastic Human-Computer Interaction Institute, and the span of work there ranges from very incremental work that has to do with like millisecond reaction time studies to prove that rearranging the rearranging the interface elements on some screen, by rearranging them, you'll save 20 milliseconds on some design, right? And that represents an improvement. That's like the most sort of incremental type work, to some incredibly speculative work that, again, tries to expand the vocabulary and just says, well, what if the world worked this way, and what if the world worked that way? Stuff where you can't have a provable comparison to say, this is clearly better than the alternative, right? Place new kinds of interfaces where there is no alternative because it represents a solution to a problem that hasn't even been posed yet. So that's the kind of spectrum of what human-computer interaction is nowadays. And in a lot of cases, it's design. In a lot of cases, it's anthropology. In a lot of cases, it's engineering. In a lot of cases, it's it's tinkering and problem solving, and in a lot of cases it's just small improvements to existing interfaces. What am I really saying? I'm personally much more on the speculative end. I like to explore and to invent, and I'm less concerned with improving directly. But that's just me. I mean, I think that how one conducts design as a practice is sort of up to the designer, and plenty of people are making important improvements to the world.
Are there people you work with who are interested in, I mean, I agree with you. I think the mouse sucks. I think it's ridiculous that we've been using the same device for however many years. And it's the interaction.
We have the QWERTY keyboard too. A colleague of mine, Eric Paulos, you can find him online at ericpaulos.net. I think he's doing really important work right now in what he calls citizen science. He's at the Human-Computer Interaction Institute, and he's doing work basically allowing people to, he's building technologies that allow people to discover their own potential as citizen scientists. This could mean, for example, new kinds of sensing tools that get clipped onto one's mobile phone that help you monitor aspects of your environment, like carbon monoxide or particulate, pollution, that basically make you more aware of the environment and allow and use you as an element in a kind of a larger crowd to help understand ecological and environmental trends in your vicinity. That's good work, I think. I mean, there's I'm not sure exactly what kinds of designers you'd like me to recommend. There's all kinds, but there's definitely people who are improving the world, probably much more than I am. So. For me, this is just a mode of inquiry as an artist, and probably the way I'm improving the world the most is through my students. I hope that I try and teach them, and they're going to go on to invent all kinds of new things. I have students generally from 7 or 8 different departments. So I got everything from art, architecture, design, music sometimes, and human-computer interaction, robotics, computer science, entertainment technologies. They all take my courses, and they do very different things, ranging from totally freestyle computing to real serious problem solving. Yeah. Sir?
At the end of your talk, you were talking about something that you mentioned biological art.
Yeah. So, well, not me personally doing it, but the Studio for Creative Inquiry that I direct has actually for some time had a kind of a thread of work going through it, which is working in the area of biology. One of our researchers right now is a professor alongside me in the School of Art at Carnegie Mellon, Rich Pell, for a long time a member of the Institute for Applied Autonomy. And his current project is called the Center for Post-Natural History. He is particularly interested in educating the public about the biological genetic engineering and manipulation of the genomes of various creatures to produce new forms of organisms. He's interested in how, in the tree of life until now, it's kind of had these different branches, and there's eukaryotes, and there's mammals, and there's plants, and there's jellyfish, and so forth. And suddenly now, on this tree of life, we start to see companies and other kind of entities sort of crossing the tree of life and sort of saying, well, let's hybridize. Let's take genes from this jellyfish that make it glow and put it into this rabbit. And so you start to see these like crossing branches across the tree of life that are very interesting. So he's documenting this in a museum. He has the only collection of transgenomic life outside of a laboratory in the world, although his collection of transgenomic mosquitoes just got eaten, actually, as it turns out, by a dermestid beetle. But it was bad luck. But he's been going to great lengths to kind of get almost like relics, if you will, or actual samples of biological organisms that have been bred in this way. Crazy stuff like the U.S. government bred sheep to produce spider silk in their milk. Yeah, it's true. You can look it up. Crazy stuff like that, because spider silk is such an incredibly strong thread, and wouldn't it be convenient if we could just make lots and lots of spider silk thread for future soldier uniforms? So let's breed sheep to produce milk that has spider silk in it, and these sheep exist, and Rich has found them, and so forth. Yeah. So he's got this big collection and documentation process for identifying these different organisms. He's sort of collecting genetically modified seeds and things to kind of produce. And so his current project right now is this kind of museum of genetically modified life. His idea is to basically, he's in negotiations with a couple different museums to form a little museum within a museum. Like you go down to the basement of the museum, there's a little door with gold lettering on it, Center for Post-Natural History, and you go in there, it's his little museum, like a little tumor within the big museum. So he's hopefully has some good luck in that way. And we've done some other biology art projects in the past. If you look on our website, you can find some of them. Yep. No, he does. He has some trans. The transgenomic mosquitoes were all dead. He has living transgenomic fish, which you can actually just buy. They glow various colors. No, he doesn't have a big collection of like living stuff. He's got seeds though that are germinable as well. Mixture of living and dead. Yeah. What else? You like that? Yeah. Just what you said. I mean, there's an awful lot of problem solving. Sometimes the ideas happen when I'm working on something else completely. Sometimes ideas, happen when I need to take more bus rides. I seem to have a lot of ideas, like on a bus ride. I really recommend carrying a sketchbook all the time. There's nothing that can match having a sketchbook to write down an idea or draw a little sketch when the inspiration comes. And I think being involved in active making is one of the best ways to get a lot of ideas and to get a lot of sleep, which I don't, but I wish I did, would be probably helpful. Sometimes the ideas do involve a great deal of problem solving, sometimes years of problem solving. Right now I'm working with, in collaboration with the iWriter Collective, friends of mine who have made an open source eye tracker. They've made it actually for a paralyzed graffiti artist, Tempt One in Los Angeles. He's got ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease, and they've made an eye tracker for him that allows him to draw again with his eyes. And this eye tracker that they've made, which is as good, Tempt says, as his $40,000 to be eye tracker, is open source and it uses less than $50 worth of hardware. So it's something that in some ways, actually, just to sort of point out about how new modes of practice really can get changed with open source technologies and the internet. 4 people from completely different corners of the world working together in relative, mutual isolation, developing an open source eye tracker in the course of just a couple months of work, with relatively little financial support, no direct support for the project, and they produce an open source, open hardware. Eye tracker. You can download all the specifications for what you need. It uses a Sony PlayStation 3 eye camera, and any laptop. It's cross-platform. It's free, and it's something that is making a big impact in the world. And this is how people can work now. This is 3 or 4 artists. These are artists, right? Getting together and saying we want to support a graffiti writer, and no one's going to make a piece of software for this guy to help him make graffiti designs. That's just preposterous. But 3 or 4 artists nowadays working together can do that kind of thing. And I'm benefiting from it surely because I can also use this eye tracker to do more other kinds of speculative explorations. So the ideas come from being part of a community. Ideas come from making these things. The ideas come during the problem solving and sometimes when we're not solving the problems. But there's just a fantastic new way of making things. And there's just, you tap into the communities and you sort of see what's going on. If you follow Twitter, like choose 100 people that you think are really interesting and you'll get a lot of ideas kicking around your head just from watching the latest stuff that's going on. Yeah. Well, that's probably really good. Thank you so much for your time.